Good evening. Welcome to the August 3rd meeting of Troy City Council. I'm Marty Baker, President of Council. Please silence your electronic devices for the duration of this meeting. We'll begin with the invocation by Mr. John Schweizer, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we are gathered here tonight to deliberate the future of our city. Guide our thoughts, our words, and our deeds, so that we may make wise decisions, so that our children and our grandchildren can grow up in the same community we've all been blessed with. We ask for your blessing on all those who serve overseas, defending our freedoms so that they may come home safely to their families. We also ask your blessing on all those who protect our homes and streets so they can also return safely to their loved ones. To all this we pray. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Phillips?
Here.
Mrs. Oda? Here. Mr. Schweizer?
Here.
Mr. Twist?
Here.
Mr. Kendall?
Here.
Mrs. Sneed? Here. Mr. Clark?
Here.
Mr. Heath?
Here.
Mr. Tremblay?
I move we excuse Mr. Tremblay.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Kendall and seconded by Mr. Clark to excuse Mr. Tremblay. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Schweizer?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mrs. Sneed? Yes. Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Tremblay is excused.
Mrs. Knight, please read a summary of the minutes of the July 20th meeting of City Council.
Minutes of Council, July 20, 2015. Committee reports. Community and Economic Development Committee recommended that legislation be prepared to accept the Trader annexation. Finance Committee recommended legislation be prepared declaring surplus a list of various items. Streets and Sidewalks Committee recommended legislation be prepared authorizing approving of the OPWC project agreement for McKeag 3. Committee recommended legislation be prepared authorizing application to OPWC for North Markets Phase 2. Utilities Committee recommended legislation be prepared authorizing an agreement with Hazen and Sawyer to design project at wastewater treatment plant. Committee recommends legislation be prepared authorizing an agreement with AgriSludge Inc. for biosolids management. Committee recommended legislation be prepared authorizing a joint cost-sharing agreement with regarding the Lower Great River Miami River Subbasin. Resolution number R34, 2015, agreement with AgriSludge, first reading and adopted. Resolution number R35, 2015, a memorandum of understanding and joint cost-sharing agreement between the owners of publicly owned treatment works was given first reading and adopted. Resolution number R36, 2015, agreement with the Ohio Public Works Commission for McKeag Road Improvement Phase 3, first reading and adopted. Resolution number R37, 2015, application to OPWC for North Market Street was given first reading and adopted. Resolution number R38, 2015, agreement with Hazen and Sawyer was given first reading and was adopted. Ordinance number 020, 2015, declaring surplus property was given first reading and adopted. Ordinance number 021, accept the annexation, Trader annexation, first reading and adopted. Following various comments, council adjourned into executive session, reconvened and adjourned at 9:27 p.m.
Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes?
Move to accept the minutes as read.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Clark and seconded by Mr. Heath to accept the minutes. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Schweizer?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mrs. Sneed? Yes. Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
The minutes are approved.
Our first committee report tonight is from the Community and Economic Development Committee and Chairman Mr. Bill Twist.
Thank you, Madam President. We have two reports this evening. The first one The committee met on July 27th to consider enterprise zone application of Arc Abrasives Incorporated and ZA60 LLC related to the new manufacturing facility to be built at 2219 Corporate Drive, an investment of $4.8 million, $3 million in new buildings and $1.8 in machinery and equipment, and adding a minimum of 15 new full-time jobs. The company requested consideration of 100% property tax abatement for 15 years. The staff has recommended 75% abatement for 10 years to be consistent with similar applications. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared to approve the enterprise zone tax abatement agreement with Arc Abrasives Incorporated and ZA60 LLC based on a 75% abatement for a 10-year period as recommended by the staff, so that the expansion plan by Arc Abrasives Incorporated can proceed as quickly as possible. We do support emergency legislation. That is respectfully submitted by Tom Kendall, John Swazer, and myself as chair, William Twist.
Do any council members have any questions? You may continue, Mr. Twist.
All right. On July 29th, committee members Kendall and Schweizer met to consider the purchase of Huelskamp Farm at a cost of $1.5 million. The property consists of 117.2782 acres located off North Troy-Sydney Road, adjacent to the Paul G. Duke Park. Obtaining this land provides the city with an opportunity for the future expansion of park recreation functions and the opportunity to consider moving the park department operations to some of the existing structures that are on that property. The immediate funding for the property would be by the council issuing bond anticipation notes in the near future, offset later by the grants or potential sales of the excess property. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to enter into a contract for sale and purchase of real estate with Paul R. Huelskamp and Jill Huelskamp, Revocable Living Trust, UAD, November 10th, 1998, with the cost of such real estate being $1.5 million. Also authorizing the issuance of BANs to fund this purchase. We do support emergency legislation for the purchase of this property so that the closing can be scheduled as soon as possible, and for the BAN legislation as that is related to the funds to purchase. Respectfully submitted by Tom Kendall, John Swazer, and myself as chair, William Twist.
Are there any questions from council? Thank you, Mr. Twist. The next report is from the Law and Ordinance Committee and Chairman, Mr. John Schweizer.
Yes, Madam President, we have two reports tonight. Committee members Schweizer and Snee met on July 22nd to consider the request of Troy Main Street that their annual Taste of Troy event include an enclosed and secured area for beer garden for the sale and consumption of beer and wine. Specifically, the beer garden would be in the parking area of the northwest quadrant and would not include the green space known as Prouty Plaza. No one under the age of 21 would be permitted within the boundary of the beer garden. Troy Main Street would apply for the F2 permit and would be required to meet all requirements of such permit. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to enter into an agreement with Troy Main Street for 2015 Taste of Troy event to include the beer garden area notwithstanding wording part of the legislation. Respectfully submitted by Mr. Phillips, Ms. Snee, and myself as chair.
Are there any questions for Mr. Schweizer? You may continue.
The second is a liquor license application notification. The Ohio Division of Liquor Control has transmitted the notice of application for the new C1 and C2 permits for Trojan Rentals, Inc., DBA One Stop Drive through 211 South Main Street. Definitions and permits availability is listed below. The police department has advised that the city has no basis of objection to the license.
Okay, I believe that's South Market. Is that
Correct.
correct?
South Market.
Yes, okay. Is there any comments or questions from council? Thank you, Mr. Schweizer. The next report is from the Streets and Sidewalks Committee and Chairman, Mr. Bobby Phillips.
Thank you, Madam President. Committee members Snee and Heath met on July 30 to consider authorizing the standard agreement with CSX Transportation Incorporated related to the city's contractor boring under the CSX line associated with the McCaig Road Improvement Project, Phase 2, so that new storm sewer can be installed. It is the recommendation of the committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to enter into a facility encroachment agreement with CSX Transportation Inc. related to the McCaig Road Improvement Project Phase 2 for the boring under the CSX line to install new storm sewer. We support emergency legislation so that the agreement can be executed as soon as possible and that the project continues on schedule. This is respectfully submitted by Mr. Heath, Mrs. Snee, and myself as chair.
Are there any questions from council on this report? Thank you, Mr. Phillips. The last report is from the Utilities Committee. In the absence of Chairman Doug Tremblay, Mr. Twist, will you be providing that report?
Yes, Madam Chair. The committee met on July 27th to consider an agreement with Frontier Communications for the purchase and installation of an integrated telecommunications upgrade to the city's data networking, voice service, and phone equipment and long-distance system at a cost not to exceed $240,000 for the first 12 months of service and the equipment purchase and installation. This agreement would be based on the state bid process for the equipment and service. The city would gain security, efficiency, equipment savings, extended benefits for a private network, updated phone systems, increased internet speed, and current technology for about $6,500 more over a 12-month period than is now being paid for several subsystems and contracts with 4 different vendors throughout the city's facilities. Based on an old and outdated system, funds are available for this project. However, a reappropriation will be needed for the technology fund. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the Director of Public Safety and Service to enter into an agreement with Frontier Communication to purchase and install an integrated telecommunications upgrade to the city's data network, networking, voice service, phone equipment, and long-distance systems at a cost not to exceed $240,000 for the first 12 months of service and the equipment purchase and installation. We further recommend that the technology fund be reappropriated by the amount of $137,250. And that is respectfully submitted by Al Clark, myself, William Twist, and Committee Chair Doug Tremblay.
Are there any questions on this report? Thank you, Mr. Twist. We now open citizen comments. There is a 2-minute time limit at this point in the meeting, and Mr. Livingston is our timekeeper. Does anyone in the audience have any questions or comments related to any of the agenda items this evening? If so, please come to the microphone and state your name and address before addressing council. Seeing none, then we'll move on to resolutions and ask Mrs. Knight to read Resolution R39, 2015.
Resolution number R39, 2015. Resolution approving the Enterprise Zone Agreement number 36 submitted by ARC Abrasives, Inc. and ZA60 LLC and authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio to execute the Enterprise Zone Agreement and related documents and declaring an emergency. This was reported on this evening. This is first reading.
Is there any discussion from council on the resolution?
Move for suspension.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Clark and seconded by Mr. Kendall to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mrs. Sneed? Yes. Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Move for adoption.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Kendall and seconded by Mr. Schweizer to adopt the resolution. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mrs. Sneed? Yes. Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, please read Resolution R40, 2015.
Resolution number R40, 2015, resolution authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio to enter into a facility encroachment agreement with CSX Transportation, Inc., for the McCaig Road Improvement Project Phase 2 and declaring an emergency. This will authorize the city to have the contractor bore under the railroad crossing to complete the project. First reading.
Are there any questions from council on the resolution?
Move for suspension.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Clark and seconded by Mr. Twist to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mrs. Sneed? Yes. Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes. Move for adoption.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Kendall and seconded by Mr. Schweizer to adopt the resolution. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mrs. Sneed? Yes. Resolution is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, please read Resolution R41, 2015.
Resolution number R41, 2015, resolution authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio, to enter into an agreement with Frontier Communications of America, Inc. for telecommunication equipment and service. This will be at a cost of not to exceed $240,000 for the first 12 months of the agreement to serve city facilities citywide, and this is the first reading.
Is there any discussion from council?
Move for suspension.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Phillips and seconded by Mr. Twist to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mrs. Sneed? Yes. Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Move for adoption.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Phillips and seconded by Mr. Schweizer to adopt the resolution. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mrs. Sneed? Yes. Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
We have 3 ordinances on the agenda this evening. Mrs. Knight, please read Ordinance O22, 2015.
Ordinance number 022, 2015. Ordinance authorizing the use of public areas for the 2015 Taste of Troy event, notwithstanding conflicting provisions of the Troy codified ordinances, and further approving the use of a portion of the area for the sale of beer and wine, subject to the issuance of proper permits by the state of Ohio and procurement of liquor liability insurance, and authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio, to enter into an agreement therefore and declaring an emergency. This would be regarding the September 19, 2015 Taste of Troy event between the hours of 11 a.m. and 4 p.m., including a enclosed beer and wine garden. This is the first reading.
Are there any questions from council on the ordinance?
Move to suspend.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Schweizer and seconded by Mrs. Sneed to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mrs. Sneed? Yes. Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Move to adopt.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Kendall and seconded by Mr. Schweizer to adopt the ordinance. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mrs. Sneed? Yes. Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Ordinance is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, please read Ordinance O23, 2015.
Ordinance number 023, 2015. Ordinance authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio, to enter into a contract for the sale and purchase of real estate for municipal use and declaring an emergency. This authorizes the purchase of the land known as the Huelskamp Farm for an amount not to exceed $1,500,000. First reading.
Are there any questions from council on the ordinance?
Move for suspension.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Phillips and seconded by Mr. Twist to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mrs. Sneed? Yes. Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Move for adopt.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Kendall and seconded by Mr. Phillips to adopt the ordinance. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mrs. Sneed?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
The ordinance is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, please read the last ordinance of the evening, O24, 2015.
Ordinance number O24, 2015, ordinance amending ordinance number O36, 2014, as amended by ordinance number O9, 2015, and ordinance number O10, 2015, appropriating funds necessary for the various departments and offices of the City of Troy, Ohio for the year 2015. This is the reappropriation of the Technology Fund and is associated with the Resolution R41, 2015, first reading.
Are there any questions from council?
Move to suspend.
Second.
It's been moved by Mrs. Oda and seconded by Mr. Kendall to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mrs. Sneed?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
I say yes. Tom was trying to answer for me, but yes.
We're anticipating.
Okay,
Yes.
Okay.
thank you.
Move to adopt. Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Schweizer and seconded by Mr. Heath to adopt the ordinance. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mrs. Oda?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mrs. Sneed?
Yes.
Ordinance is adopted.
That completes the business portion of tonight's meeting. Mrs. Knight, are there any communications or announcements?
No, there are not.
Mayor Beamish, do you have comments for us this evening?
Well, thank you, Madam President. A number of things. First of all, our sister city delegation from Takahashi has arrived. They're enjoying their opportunity. We have 9 students with us in Troy, and we have 3 adult chaperones, and we have 10 host families from Troy that are working very hard to make them have a very productive and educational experience and cultural experience here in Troy. I want to give a compliment. I know President Baker has been very active. Brock Heath's been very active. Certainly Sue Knight has orchestrated all this, and there's a lot of time and energy, and a lot of staff have also contributed to making this experience the best we can make for those students and adult chaperones. So they go back and they share the experiences in Troy, Ohio, USA. Couple of other things everybody may or may not know. There is a National Night Out. It will be held tomorrow. It will be on the levee, not necessarily in Community Park this year. It'll be on the levee. I believe that starts tomorrow around 5:30 with opening ceremonies. Just so you can mark your calendars, the Festival of Nations, another big cultural event that the Heaths are co-chairing right now, and that will be on August the 15th. That also will again be on the levee. So I think we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 different cultures represented in that special event. It goes from 2 o'clock to 8 o'clock. Mark your calendars. That is really a good thing to have our citizens celebrate each of our cultures. Mayor's concert is coming up. That'll be the following day. That's August 16th, and that'll be on Proudy Plaza, weather permitting, and that starts at 7. And for those way down the line at the tail end of August, Systems Go from the Air Force Band of Flight will be joining us as they have customarily and traditionally done here in Troy. That will also take place on August 23rd. And that'll be at 7 o'clock as well. It's a good way we've had 2 Army bands with us this summer, and this will be the Air Force joining us. So hope everybody can attend and enjoy those concerts and activities. Thank you. That's it. I think I covered a lot.
Thank you. Mr. Titterington, any comments this evening?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have nothing this evening.
Thank you. Mr. Livingston, any comments this evening?
None this evening, Madam President.
Thank you. Mr. Stickle, any comments?
I have no comments, Madam Chair.
Okay. I would just like to express thanks to Officer James Richardson for his years of service and wish him many years of enjoyable retirement. And Chief, if you would pass that on to him, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. Are there any comments from council members tonight? Anyone from city staff have any comments this evening? Anyone else in the audience have any comments or questions this evening? Thank you.